Welcome to Newshour. Well, it's happened again. A second Oval Office ambush by President Trump. This time it was the turn of South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa, facing unexpected questions from Mr. Trump over claims of a white genocide in South Africa. In fact, what was more of a staged performance went far beyond surprise questions, with Mr. Trump handing out copies of news articles and video footage playing showing people chanting, "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer." Well, Trump says white farmers are fleeing South Africa. During what became a tense exchange, Cyril Ramaphosa did not deny the existence of specific crimes against farmers, but he did strongly refute accusations of any state support or acquiescence. And unlike President Zelensky, perhaps learning from President Zelensky, he remained relatively composed in response to the provocation. Well, tonight, as always, we look from both sides. First, let's go to Washington, D.C. and hear from our correspondent, Nick Harper.
Well, guys, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa was here in Washington, D.C., in his words, to try and reset relations. Relations that have been rocky for some time with the Trump administration. Over the last few months, we've seen the U.S. administration expelling the U.S. ambassador to the United States and pushing, on multiple occasions, these false claims of white genocide, that the South African government is killing white South African farmers and seizing their land. We've even seen the Trump administration welcoming in white South African farmers as refugees to the United States in just the last couple of weeks. Now, Cyril Ramaphosa was hoping to reset relations, but also speak about trade, removing tariffs, and potential investment opportunities. And the meeting seemed to be going well. There was a good repartee between the two leaders. They were even joking about golf. But then about 25 minutes into the meeting, Donald Trump very quickly changed the tone of the meeting. He asked his staff to lower the lights in the Oval Office and then showed a 4.5-minute video that he said was all about black South Africans calling for the killing of white South Africans. He continued to push those unsubstantiated claims of white genocide and essentially led the South African president into a debate on whether or not it was happening. The South African president pushed back against it. He said there was criminality in his country, but it disproportionately affected black South Africans. He remained calm under pressure, and that is something that has been praised by South African meeting in the hours since that Oval Office encounter. They've said that he didn't take the bait, that he didn't raise his voice or get angry, because there was fear going into this meeting that he might be ambushed in the way that he was and in the way that President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine was just a few months ago. And of course, that led to that explosive Oval Office meeting. So undoubtedly, there has not been a reset in relations between the two countries. If anything, off the back of this meeting, relations are rockier. And it all ended with Donald Trump not yet committing to whether or not he would attend the G20 summit in South Africa later this year, an event that the US president would normally attend.
Okay, Nick Harper there for us in Washington, D.C. Well, let's stay in the US Capitol now and delve a bit deeper into this with A News's Oubai Shahbandar. Oubai, always good to see you. Give us the perspective then from the point of view of those loyal supporters of President Trump. Do people see this atypical approach as standing up for them, speaking truth to powerful people?
Well, it's what President Trump supporters elected him to do. I mean, scouring social media and conservative media, they absolutely loved it. The people loved to see President Trump take to task yet another foreign leader in the Oval Office, in front of the American media, in front of international media. Look, a war to the wise. If you're a foreign leader, you walk into the Oval Office and there's a big TV or one of the aides is holding a big chart, you're going to be in for a show. And so it was clear that Cyril Ramaphosa was not prepared for what was about to happen when President Trump told his aides to dim the lights and showed a series of interviews of individuals, of political leaders in South Africa chanting, "Kill the Boer, kill the white farmer," with thousands rallying behind that incitement for mass killings. He also showed the South African leader a video of a string of cars, hundreds of cars holding crosses commemorating the dead South Africans that President Trump said that they had information that they were recently killed. And look, the reaction here, from what I've seen, has been entirely very positive, particularly amongst President Trump's supporters, and those that lean towards supporting him. They love to see a strong president taking to task a foreign leader in the Oval Office. They love to see the reaction of the South African leader and how President Trump kept pressing him and doing it in front of the glaring lights of the international media. And the fact that, look, you're not going to see this anywhere else. You're not going to see any other foreign leader do this to a visiting head of state in such a manner. And perhaps it will also be effective from a policy perspective. We also have to keep in mind that after the cameras left, that President Trump and Ramaphosa sat down for a long behind closed doors meeting. So there's also a perspective both here in Washington and across Middle America, across the rest of the country, that perhaps you need to play, quote, hardball in order to to change the policies of another country that you oppose, that perhaps naming and shaming them in front of and showing, such, atrocities to the world will force that country to act and to take action. So that certainly seems to be the political calculus of President Trump. And President Trump has his finger on the pulse of what his supporters, the millions that elected him with in which he won the re-election with a substantial margin, that this is what they want to see from President Trump. President Trump is, after all, a master showman, but these type of confrontations are also done in a very calculated way, knowing that this issue of the white African refugees and farmers who've had their lands appropriated, that are facing attacks, that this plays well to his base. In fact, one of the most almost surreal moments of that meeting in that Oval Office between the South African president and President Trump was one of the South African golfers who's known worldwide accompanied President Ramaphosa. President Trump knows him, and that golfer started telling the President Trump in front of Ramaphosa the difficulties, the threats of violence that his own family, who are farmers in South Africa, are also facing. So this is seen from a policy perspective, a forcing function, to get Ramaphosa to take action. You have these people leading these chants, leading these massive rallies. You've got a government that passed a law in South Africa that can appropriate and take over land without due process and without compensation. And that, of course, affects the South African Afrikaans, the white minority who own most of the farming land in that country. And President Trump wants him to take action. But certainly from an American political standpoint, President Trump showing that video and then the White House immediately posting it on X and social media certainly had the reaction that the White House was hoping from the wider American public, and certainly from President Trump's supporters, who always know that they're in for a show when the president sits in the White House, in the Oval Office, with the cameras running, and another foreign leader.
They always know they're in for a show. Oubai, thank you as always for your insight. Oubai Shahbandar there for us in Washington, D.C. Okay, let's cross now to South Africa and speak to the global political risk analyst and former South African ambassador to both Portugal and Kenya, Dr Kingsley Makhubela. Dr. Makhubela, thank you very much for joining us on Newshour.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Guy.
It is. It's been a very interesting few hours, few days since this happened. The South African president described the meeting as a great success. Your assessment, please, of what happened inside that Oval Office.
You know, Guy, the meeting took 2 stages. The first stage where they exchanged niceties and joked and really lowered the temperature in the Oval Office. That was a good part. The second part is the engagement with the media that really went way beyond what was expected. And I tend to think President Ramaphosa played to this too. Because when a question at first was raised about a question of genocide, President Trump said, yeah, we're going to talk about these issues. There's genocide, it's or not, but these are issues we're going to talk about. He then moved on to talk about the conflict between Ukraine and Russia and other conflicts in Africa, in the DRC, and so on. But when a question was asked directly to President Trump about the genocide, to repeat that, President Ramaphosa then interjected at that stage, and he said, let me answer this for you. And I think he fell for it at that stage, because what he should have said, in my own view, was to say, listen, we're going to talk about these issues in the closed session, as President Trump indicated, and I hope coming out of this meeting, we'll find each other in terms of the dynamics of this. But he then started to want to rebut the fact that Trump said there's genocide. And challenging Trump in the presence of camera rolling, I think, was a serious miscalculation.
Very interesting, this. I mean, what do you make of President Trump's performative approach to these meetings? It's now the second time we've seen something like this, where a world leader has been surprised by something in the Oval Office. I mean, on the one hand, you could argue that it's refreshing, it's transparent, it's asking the questions, making the points that voters might want to make themselves. On the other hand, do you think these sorts of stunts, ambushes, perhaps can be damaging for international relations?
Well, what is quite clear is resetting the etiquette of diplomacy. I think the only head of government who managed to handle President Trump in the Oval Office very well was the Canadian Prime Minister Mike Carney, because he moved from the basis that, you know, the Oval Office, it's not for sale. And then he then said, Mr. President, in the same context, Canada is not for sale, and I've just had a mandate. But the manner in which he introduced his argument was so disarming for Trump, and it changed the narrative. And I think perhaps maybe, Guy, it's good that Trump is resetting the whole diplomatic etiquette. With the advent of social media communication, he's quite quick to communicate serious governmental issues over social media. I think that is changing. I think we diplomats are really looking into these changes and see, are they really in line with diplomatic etiquette? You may see changes even in the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations in terms of the mode of communication.
Yeah, it's very interesting, this shift in diplomatic norms that's clearly happening, and different people are adapting better than others to those changes. I'd like to talk about South Africa for a moment. And could you give us an insight into what President Ramaphosa wanted to get from this meeting and what he wants more broadly from relations with the US?
That has been a big problem. I think he should have better crystallized his message and focus on the brutal of the allegation that South Africa is involved in some form of genocide. I think that's much more damaging for any state to be accused of genocide. So the whole calibration of the message should have centered around that. And I really agree with your correspondents in Washington that even the golfers, you could see they were not properly briefed. So to me, that was indicative of poor planning around the communication and focus on specific issues. He was all over. He was speaking about the mineral that South Africa has, trade and investment, and you could see Trump was not interested on those issues. The only interest that Trump had was around this issue of genocide. And of course, that is taking, the discussion took place in the Oval Office within the context of geopolitical dynamics that are really happening, realignment of global forces and the emergence of new powers. I think that influenced this kind of tough stance that President Trump needed to project himself in terms of the American populace.
And what's your assessment of the allegations specifically? I mean, obviously the defence, the response that President Ramaphosa gave was one of admitting, of course, like any country, criminality takes place and tragic things occur, but making the point that this is not a systemic issue, there's no acquiescence or support for this on behalf of the government. What's your own assessment of the problem, how significant it is, and the government's response to tackling it?
You know, Guy, the question of genocide, it was totally unfounded. There are no facts that really support this argument that South Africa is involved in one way or another in genocide. However, the question of crime in the country is getting out of control. And the porous nature of the borders makes it very complicated. I mean, one of the billionaires, South African billionaires, Johan Rupert, who was in the meeting, was quite point on in saying this crime is not only directed at farmers. You have gang warfare in the country that is going on. And I think that's where the issue is. It's a serious problem of crime. But the government has been grappling with really arresting this crime. And I tend to think also living in South Africa, it's getting out of control. And it's time to really relook into the policing system. And I think that's where Ramaphosa should have given Trump perhaps a point to retreat from this, to say to him, we need to support each other in dealing particularly with transnational criminal thing, which the United States is also facing. You may have seen Trump deporting a lot of people, arguing that they are criminal. South Africa is in the same position. So there's no basis. I mean, I looked at the convention, the convention on genocide. It spells out how genocide is totally defined, and there are no facts that really support the allegation.
Very, very interesting indeed. Obviously, very, very serious situation. Dr. Makhubela, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Newshour and sharing your insights with us. Thank you.
It's a pleasure, Guy. Thank you.
So, President Trump is the leader by far of the most powerful country in the world. A vast military and an economy still far ahead of the nearest competition. US GDP is not just higher than China, it's higher than China, Germany and India combined. So with so much at stake, world leaders and diplomats can't just simply refuse to engage. There are valid questions about the style and approach of this US administration. Let's face it, bureaucracy is boring and sometimes bad for business. But great good can come at times from breaking rules and shedding traditions. Diplomatic protocol, though, isn't just ceremonial. Often it can help to cement trust and create stability, stretching far beyond political personalities. And that's something appreciated on all sides of politics. With great power comes great responsibility, is a quote as popular with scholars of Voltaire as it is with lovers of Spider-Man comic books. That's all for now on Newshour. From the whole team here in Baku, thank you for watching.